This is Anne-Marie, host of About This Life. About This Life is a podcast that focuses on our struggles and some of the obstacles that come into our way. And sometimes people have found their way out of it, out of the spiral. In order to find their way out of the spiral, we hope that they would be a light unto others and share their stories of coming through so that the rest of us, other people, can be able to see how they might thrive in their own lives. So, About This Life is about finding these stories. Welcome, Lizbeth. How are you?
I'm well. Thank you so much for having me, Anne-Marie.
Oh, it is my pleasure. Lizbeth, today I want to introduce you as an educator. You are a writer, laughter yoga leader. My, that you and I will do well. Conflict mediator, and you do something called internal family systems practitioner. Woo, that is a lot. Okay. But first, I'm going to start with the laughter yoga part because we all know what yoga is. Why are we laughing in yoga? And as you can see, I'm an easy pick. I laugh. What's the benefit of laughter yoga? What is it?
Laughter yoga. The benefits are that people just feel a lot happier in their day, and it's great for the human body because it just releases endorphins. It's great for breathing, and that's actually the origins of it. So it's not exactly yoga how we traditionally think of yoga, but yoga is all about breathing. So we do breathing exercises and we turn those exhalations into laughter, and it's incredibly fun. So yeah.
We have to go through an example. I'll tell you a little story because my mom, who's since transitioned, she's passed on. My mom had a giggle. For years and years, I thought the giggle, she's shy, she's nervous, so on and so forth. I happen to laugh like my mom. And for a while, I was embarrassed of it. But now I'm just like, I've reached an age I just don't care. Because people think you're silly when you laugh. So give me an example of laughter yoga. I mean, I understand it intellectually, but what does it look like?
Okay, so you just take any simple breathing exercise.
Okay.
So for example, we might like take a big inhalation and do a stretch with it like that. And then as we breathe out, lower your arms, get all of that air out of your lungs. And then on the next breath, do the same thing with the inhalation. And then as you exhale, we're just going to turn that into a laugh. We're just going to go, ah.
I get it.
And it just becomes this deep belly laugh. And it feels really good. And we don't have enough of those belly laughs during the day. So sometimes we just have to make it happen because the benefits are just so amazing.
Yes, because the Bible says laughter is medicine for the soul.
Exactly.
How can you remain angry? How can you be upset? How can you hold tension if you are laughing?
Exactly. Yeah.
And isn't that because one of your roles is a conflict mediator, and I could just see it. It's like you're arguing, like your clients, you're arguing with somebody, and all of a sudden it's like, let's do a yoga laugh.
Yeah, I really wanted to bring more laughter into my practice. So, and one of the things about internal family systems therapy is this connection to ourselves, who we are at core. And there's an aspect of playfulness that is about who we are authentically. So laughter is one way of tapping into that playfulness.
Oh, let's talk all about it. I'm about play today. Okay. So first of all, what is your business? Let's start with that foundation, and let's tease it apart after we go from there. So what do you do?
Okay. So I'm an internal family systems therapy practitioner, which means that I help people heal their childhood trauma. Often it's from childhood, sometimes it's from adulthood too. And we do that by tapping into the self energy, which is who they are at core, this compassionate, curious place of deep connection and courage within all of us. And we use that to go to the parts of us the subpersonalities, or, we all talk about different parts of us, some of which carry trauma. And we go to those places, we witness it, we do it in a way that's gentle, compassionate, not re-traumatizing. And we help those parts to release that trauma, release that pain, and heal it so that people can live lives of joy, freedom, creativity, playfulness, all of that.
So my question is, because I happen to have personal experience with this as a recipient. I've worked with not even one coach, but coaches who have started me on this path, many moons ago, that speaks to reaching back to the inner child, for example.
Right. Yeah.
And even more recently, doing the work in terms of reaching out to different significant age points within life. Okay. Yeah. So when we do that, in terms of the internal family systems, are you working with a client individually, or are they in family counseling type of situation? How does that work? What does it look like?
So for me, it mostly looks like working with individuals. I do some couples also and some family work, but most of the time it is with individuals. And if I do it with couples, then often issues come up. We witness that as a group. So then if a couple is witnessing some really deep, vulnerable things going on in the other person, they're able to bring a compassionate heart to that, which is really healing to the relationship. And then we often go back and have individual work too, so that they can go into what happened to them more deeply, So I think that's my forte. I work best with individuals, though I do some other groups too.
So it's like it could be a sounding board in a couple situation. But let's go back to the individual, since that's your wheelhouse and where you work best. What are the type of issues that you find clients come up with when they come to you? Let me ask a question before I get to this one. By the time they come to you, what have they tried?
Okay. So people may have tried meditation, and meditation is wonderful for getting to know your inner system. People have often tried things like cognitive behavioral therapy, and that has been helpful because I think any type of therapy is often helpful because it's about going inside and trying to do some healing, and that intention alone is going to achieve so much. My issue with CBT is that it's often talking about trauma. So we can narrate what happened, but we don't actually get to the young parts of us who experience the trauma. So people try different modalities of therapy, and sometimes they've been in therapy for years. With internal family systems, IFS, it tends to be a lot faster because we go to the parts of us who experience the trauma.
Okay. So thank you for explaining that, the difference between CBT, cognitive behavior therapy, and what you do in terms of internal family systems. Now, what are some examples of the deep-seated trauma that we have buried in our subconscious minds?
Unfortunately, most of it is childhood trauma. And it's absolutely heartbreaking how common stories are of physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional neglect, so much. And I really wish that, we could just learn from that as a society, because this is what adults are struggling with, and turn that back and give it back to parents and say, we need to do better. We need to do better for our children so that they're not going to experience this as adults, because it causes so much pain.
It does. I've had several people on the show on About This Life, and we've talked about trauma. And I don't know if I'm living in a bubble. I may be, but it seems like so many people are living in a trauma or living in trauma. And it all stems back to, as you say, to childhood. So
Right.
what is it as a society, as a world, are we doing? What in the world are we doing with our children? I
Yeah.
mean,
Right.
what are some of the causes of trauma? What are some examples of a trauma-related experience?
Well, I
You
think,
mentioned some.
unfortunately, Unfortunately, there's a lot of generational trauma. So although over time, I think children are treated better than they were 100, 200 years ago, there's still a lot of trauma because our parents, our grandparents, many of them suffered abuse, neglect, that type of thing. And although hopefully parents try to do a better job over time, they're still passing a lot of that on. So if parents have this woundedness that they're not dealing with, they are going to react to it. They're going to be activated, and then they're going to do similar things to their children. So what we have to do is say, this is what happened to me, and heal that so we don't pass it on to our children, so we can break the pattern. And then in terms of what's happening, I mean, there are some really tragic stories out there. It's absolutely horrendous. But it can be even really slight things like parents who didn't give their children enough attention, parents who shut their children down when they were showing their authentic selves, when they were told that they were too much, that they didn't have a place in their parents' hearts, let alone the family, let alone society. You know, these things are deeply wounding to innocent children who just want to be loved, seen, and accepted for who they were.
Okay, so my goodness. So we're speaking, what I'm hearing is how do we break the patterns and generational cycles from one generation to the next? Because we often raise our children the way we were raised, the way we were taught.
Right.
And that comes in the form of verbal as well as the physical.
Right.
When I say physical, I'm thinking about, we provide housing or we
Right.
provide shelter, food, so on and so forth. Touch upon the verbal, the messages we say to children, whether at home or in the school building. Talk
Right.
about the verbal damage that a child
Yeah.
can experience.
Right. So I think one of the common manifestations of emotional and verbal abuse is that many adults have an inner critic. And this inner critic can really make life unpleasant. So we criticize ourselves. When we do suffer pain, we often blame ourselves. We might gaslight ourselves. And if you look at the roots of this, it often stems from childhood. Now, our parents may have spoken to us in those ways, or teachers or other adult caregivers. And what we learned as children was if we could have an internal part of us who adopted that role, then we could criticize ourselves before people on the outside could. So
Almost
in a
like a
way,
defense mechanism.
yes, yeah. So these inner critics, they actually develop to protect us, though it sounds counterintuitive. But if they could criticize us and slap us into shape so that we would behave, we were more likely to get that love and acceptance from our parents. And it's a lot more painful to hear that from your parents because your survival is being threatened compared to hearing it from the inside. So one way to deal with this inner critic is to see it for its role. So instead of, blaming ourselves, criticizing ourselves, and then turning that back on the inner critic, and really despising the role of the inner critic in our lives, what we can do is show it some appreciation, not for how it's playing out, but for its original intention. Find out what circumstances it arose in. How did it develop? What was going on at that time in our lives? And often these parts of us, they're like little beings inside us. They're subpersonalities. Often they don't even want to be in that role. I've never met an inner critic who says, yeah, I love my job. They're tired of it. They don't want to have this effect on the rest of us, really bringing us down. So if we can go to the parts of us who originally suffered the trauma, help them release that pain, these protectors, they don't have to do that role anymore. And then they can become our cheerleaders, our motivators.
Okay, so I'm going, wow. Wow. I heard you say, and this is my interpretation of what you have said, it's almost like instead of resisting them, instead of hating them, what I'm hearing you say is to actually thank them because they serve the inner critic, the way we self-deprecated language to ourselves, like, you're so stupid for doing that,
Yeah.
how awful are you? And, you can never amount to much, or you'll never be that gorgeous. You'll never be that beautiful. So that
Right.
inner critic is actually was actually rooted in protection.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
how it formed. And I
Yeah.
guess the bigger the critic, the more protection it needed, I imagine.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so to witness to it is to say, this is a whole mindset shift, Lizbeth, that you're saying. This is a mindset shift saying, thank you. Thank you for protecting me. And now we're going to do things differently. Is that
Yeah.
what I'm hearing you say?
That's it. Exactly. And realize that when they developed this role, the person was a child, you were a child. There weren't lots of strategies that were available. It's like children running a show. They're not going to take on the best roles. They do what they know how to do. They mimic it from the outside world too. But yeah, they were just trying their best to protect these young, tender parts of you that so needed to be loved and accepted.
Um, is it when we say child, I always think maybe 5 to 10 years old or something like that. Do we develop inner critics, or do we develop any other negative energy around ourselves at different age groups?
Oh, yeah.
There's adolescence, there's young adulthood. We're still trying to find out who we are.
Right.
There's being inside of a marriage or outside of a marriage.
Right.
Are there significant places in our age groups that this happens as well?
It really does. So it depends on the child's circumstances and how loved and protected they are. But when I've worked with clients, I have worked with exiles from a pre-verbal babies who are like before they can even speak, and they are that young and they experienced rejection. And they may not have been able to articulate it, but the body stores it. The body stores that trauma, and then we can access it by listening to what's going on in the body. And then there are different experiences throughout childhood. So yes, from 0 to 5, 5 to 10, teenage years. And then even in adulthood, we can still experience trauma, of course, and have these parts of us develop, exiles, carry that pain, and then we shut them away because it's so painful. So we call those exiles neo-exiles because they
Your
developed
exams.
in adulthood. And they're usually a lot easier to access and heal because they're not so connected to all the wiring and conditioning from when we were young and we were forming our views of the world and our place in it. So, but there's definitely hope. I've worked with clients who have had really difficult childhoods. And one of them said to me recently, wow, this is what it feels like to have had a happy childhood. So there's a lot
Oh,
of hope in healing this stuff.
there's a lot of hope in healing it. And we come back to breaking generational curses and generational patterns and turning it away. How do you work with someone? Okay, I want to do this for myself as an individual, but I am an individual within a family. And those family members that have, um, I don't want to say the cause of it, those family members that created the environment for that inner critic. How do you navigate that? How does a person navigate? Because you can't change your family.
Right, right. So we have to be careful because it really depends on who the people are within the family relationships that are creating, reinforcing these patterns. So, for example, if it's a parent, then and I mostly work with adults, so I do work with adolescents too sometimes. And of
Mhm.
course, for young people, there is this a power imbalance, and we have to tread really carefully to make sure that they are safe within the family. But for adults, they may decide that they want some space from their parents. They may want to try and raise these
Right.
issues with their parents. Unfortunately, if it's a person that they're in an intimate relationship with who may be being abusive to them, we can work with that person and their parts, but we also have to realize that their safety is paramount. And sometimes when we work with these issues, bring more self-energy into them, it could make them more vulnerable, because they're exposing who they are. They may be standing up for themselves more. So we have to realize we're doing it in the context of their life, their relationships, and tread carefully.
Absolutely. And another movie comes to mind, and I am so poor at, here's my inner critic coming out. I just caught myself
I do that with books. I always forget the title of books.
Oh my God.
But then I say, a book is just one line. The title is just one line of a book. I remember the story, the characters, the emotions,
I remember. Well, thank you for that, because I'm like, look at how we do it unconsciously.
Yeah.
You know? I'm like thinking myself, but anyway, my heartbeat, Denzel Washington, love him, especially when he's in a uniform. Okay, one of my favorite actors, and he had a movie, and by the time we air this episode, I need to find these movie titles. But in the movie, he is counselor to, I want to say, the Navy, to a young Navy man enlisted. And as we go back, as we peel away the layers, because at the first session, the young man says nothing. The hour passes and he walks out the office.
Wow.
And then, but he keeps coming because he has to, he's obligated to. And we find out the horrendous nature of his childhood.
Wow.
Why I remember the movie, though, is he actually found his birth mom. He was adopted, and he found his birth mom, and she's an addict. But he goes to visit her, the young man being mentored, and he tells her all the beautiful things. He tells her, I'm grown up now. I made it. I'm in the Navy. He's telling her, almost like reconciling or resetting himself, but speaking to her, who's clearly, under the influence, that I made something of myself. So sometimes in families, sometimes it could be that kind of healing too.
Yeah.
I have a question for you. And yes, I need to go find the name of that movie, because it's going to bother me until I know. All I know is
I know you've piqued my interest
Washington.
now. I want to see that movie.
And I'll have to email you and tell you what the name of it, as well as the Martin Lawrence one.
Right.
But what about trauma that comes from physical injury, like brain injury? Somebody may have been in an accident, a car accident. Someone may have fallen. What about, are those treated differently? Do they manifest differently with us?
Well, it really depends on the person's experience of the physical trauma and any support that they received during that time. But if they didn't receive the support, then it becomes an emotional issue. If they held on to that trauma, then, and it's still affecting them, then it also is an emotional issue. So then we would deal with it similarly. So I had a client who brought an issue to me that sometimes they seem kind of trivial, the issues that we bring, and it's got some deep roots. So we always take it seriously. And the issue that she brought was that she was struggling with waking up in the mornings. She felt really cold and she just didn't want to get out of bed. So we said, okay, let's approach this with some curiosity.
I don't mean to make light of that, but I'm doing like I'm sorry.
It would be so easy to just say, everyone
witness that, because especially winter time and I've got to go to work. So it's like, oh Lord, no, is it Saturday? But anyway. Let me get my face straight, because this is serious. Okay,
but
so
I think that for anyone, anyone, it's different. It can be difficult to get out of bed. And I think that this story, I mean, what happened to her was very serious and sad.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there's reasons for it for all of us. You know, like we might not feel motivated with life. We might not have enough in our day to make us jump out of bed, or at least get out of bed with a
Right.
bit more enthusiasm. But with her, we explored what was going on with her parts, and she actually tapped into an experience she had when she was about 16 of having an appendectomy. So she had her appendix removed, and there was some serious errors in how the anesthetic was administered. She was conscious throughout the procedure, and she felt all
Wow.
of the pain. And she was aware of what happened. She clearly remembered it, and she thought that she had dealt with it, but there was still pain and trauma there that we needed to access and witness and release. So, yeah.
Okay. So first of all, I want to go back and say that when working with someone and talking with someone, it is so important that we not make light of it like I just did. Because let me tell you, in terms of the emotional realm, one of the challenges people go through, and just my lived experience in terms of talking to so many people, is that you're often not believed,
Right,
you're often not validated, you're often not affirmed, and people tend to be dismissive.
right,
So even though that was a light moment that I made of, I want to come back to the seriousness of it and affirm what it is people go through
right.
from an emotional point of view. My next question centers on the idea that there can often be a connection to depression.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely. Yeah.
because it is the sense that, what would you say, Lisbeth, in terms of what you see with your clients? Someone, then they're not exactly sure what's wrong. All they know is that something is wrong. And so how does the IFS system explain what you mean by witness? We touched upon it a few minutes ago, but let's come back to that, to access that pain point and to witness to it. So
Mm.
somebody, they don't know where their trauma's coming from. They don't remember, they weren't abused. They weren't talked down to. There's just a malaise that they're experiencing. Break that down for us.
So I think, first of all, if someone is coming with depression, general malaise, and they're saying, I wasn't abused, I wasn't talked down to, I had a great childhood. What I want to inquire is perhaps they're gaslighting themselves, dismissing their own pain and trauma. Because what I have seen is that even small instances of being dismissed as a child can have a big effect. And even being beaten as a child, people can dismiss that and say that they turned out okay. So what I
Mm-hmm.
would want to do is, first of all, I would question if they really did have a happy childhood. Now, I wouldn't necessarily do that on an intellectual level. I wouldn't say, are you sure? I wouldn't engage in a discussion about it. But if a person is coming with a general malaise, something is telling them inside them that things aren't
Mm-hmm.
quite right, that there's something that needs their attention. And what we do is we just build trust with parts. We access whatever memories parts want to show us. And
Right.
it's really interesting how memories will arise. And sometimes I'm in my own IFS sessions and I'm like, I have no idea why I'm seeing this memory. Am I just creating it? Am I just going to it? I don't know, but I go with it. I see what happens. And then when you see the connections, it starts to make sense. If you can just suspend judgment and just listen to what's going on. So the way we access the memories is we ask permission of the protector parts if it's okay to go to these exiles who carry these burdens. We tread
Mm.
gently because we don't want to re-traumatize the person. And
Mm.
unfortunately, people have also experienced in therapy going too quickly, going without trust, without permission. And that can be really destabilizing to people. So we want to make sure that we do it with everyone inside on board so that it does feel gentle and safe. And then what we do is we really strengthen the relationship and connection between this self energy, this essence of who you are, and the parts. And we show parts that they are seen, that they are heard, they're acknowledged for who they are. We use that power of self. We reach out with compassion and curiosity. And then when parts show us the trauma that they experienced, we're witnessing it from that place. We're not witnessing it from another part who might have an opinion about it, you know, who might dismiss it. We just ask those parts to step aside, and we focus on strengthening this self to part relationship. And then parts, we ask them, do you feel like I get it? Do you feel like you're understood for what really happened? Sometimes they need to share more so that they really feel understood. And then when that happens, then we do the unburdening process. We ask them if they're ready to release pain. We take them out of sticky situations, painful memories. We bring them to our heart where we can continue building this relationship with them. And then they can live out those joyful qualities in our current lives.
Okay. What if somebody wants to release the pain, but it doesn't come? Does that mean there's more digging that needs to happen?
Quite possibly. It could also be that they don't quite trust the self yet, because some people, when they were traumatized as children, they experienced self as having abandoned them. So then it might take time to build that sense of trust with self, that self isn't going to abandon them again. Sometimes I just say, are you ready to release pain? Even if it's just 1%, because that can start relieving the burden. And over time, we go back, we say, are you ready to release more? Other parts could be getting in the way. Parts are really sensitive. And if they sense that there's any internal judgment, they may not want to release the pain. So then we say, hey, is there anyone else who's blocking the flow of compassion here? And we find out. And then we ask those parts to step aside.
And then, like, pain can actually serve a purpose because, you know, how does this saying go? It's better to deal with the devil you know than the devil that you don't. So that pain, because as you described earlier, is a protector. And if that's all that person knows, that's what that person is clinging to, in some cases. So a person can actually get stuck in that
I mean, I think
situation.
pain is really helpful because it tells that something's wrong, that something needs our attention. Sometimes clients may believe that the pain is serving them because it's a reminder to not get into those situations again. So again, we don't push that.
Well, you talking to so many women.
Right.
You know, but let's talk, you know, when you talk about relationships and so many women who have been hurt. And in all fairness to the guys too, to the fellows as well. In terms of in relationships, there's so much pain that's exchanged between one partner and another. And so, yes, block, red flags, and all of that business. So, how do you move and get unstuck? You know, because that pain does, you learn a lesson from relationships that haven't worked out.
Right.
And so how do you move past that block? Inquiring minds want to know.
So we do it at a pace that works for the person. And sometimes, and we're not condoning that they ever forgive or forget either. But we're asking them when they're ready, would they be willing to let go of any pain that no longer serves them? So it isn't just the memory. It could actually be harming their body. It could be hampering their lives. So what we want to do is say, how can we retain the memory of what happened? Can we have other protectors, perhaps? And we get really creative about this. It's fun. But we ask other protectors to step in and say, hey, can you wave the red flags? Do we need to have this major alert, this trauma response? Do we need to have that as the reminder? Can we release some of that pain and have other parts of us do that warning system, hold the memories of it so that it isn't playing out in our lives and harming us. And sometimes it might involve really creative strategies. So I witnessed a client, and they wanted to let go of the pain, but the exile wanted to put the pain onto vinyl records as if they were kind of grinding it into the record, then hang them on the wall so they could see it, remember it, but they let go of their emotional connection to the pain. And sometimes it's the young parts of us that carry that trauma. Those children inside us, it's not their job to wave the red flags. We have other adult parts inside us. What we want to do is let those children be free and be fun and be children again, and have other parts of us take over and do those roles of effective discernment and assessing whether these people are safe to bring into our lives.
And it's what I'm hearing you speak about is also boundaries.
Yeah,
in
definitely.
order to set the boundaries that we need. But at this time, the adult has a choice in the boundaries that they can put in place for protection, lessening the role of the pain. Lessening the role of the pain, so then you can eventually let go and release that pain. Lizbeth, is there such a thing as being completely healed? Because sometimes just in conversation, someone may have gone through releasing their trauma and working on it only to have their triggers, and find themselves back at square one. So is this a cyclical thing that you constantly have to do? Like if you had a health situation and you constantly have to monitor yourself, is this something that one has to do, or is it a one and done deal?
I don't think it's a one and done deal. I'm only 51, so, I've healed some of my trauma, but I have heard of people in their 70s and 80s, people who are really committed to their healing, and they are still discovering exiles who need help releasing their trauma. So I think it's an ongoing life process. But as we go through life, ideally, we heal more and more so that it's less like walking through eggshells in the world. There's less trigger points, less activation happening. Now, if people do get reactivated and find themselves back at square one, there are a couple of things that could have happened. One is that the exile didn't release all of the pain. We also need to check in with exiles once they have released the pain, because otherwise they can slip back into that old place. So what we need to do is bring them to our hearts, really consolidate their place in our hearts and our connection with them. And that can be like just a daily checking in practice for a couple of weeks after that session. Another interesting thing that we've seen is that with traumatic events, people may have more than one exile associated with a traumatic experience. So we may need to release each exile one by one, and then they will have some healing and peace around that original experience.
My. I'm listening, I'm unpacking, and I'm processing the value of this work that you do in terms of addressing the exile. You mentioned creative several times. There are some practitioners that use visual art. There are some practitioners that use different modalities in terms of their own healing. What is your take on that in terms of helping the exiles that we find within?
Well, I think visual arts, dancing, music, all of these things, they're ways to tap into self-energy. So I think however people can access more self-energy in their lives and bring that to their healing, the better. So I said earlier that meditation is a great way to know oneself.
Yes.
Knowing who you are and what makes you happy, what makes you come alive, that's really important, because then you can realize more of your self energy in your life do more of those things to bring that in. So we can use this as a daily practice to actually bring more healing into every moment of our lives, even if it doesn't have to be formal therapy. It can just be like, I want to bring more of this love into my life, to my parts, and I'm going to work on those connections in a moment by moment basis.
Okay. And then on the opposite end, you might find, people are seeking healing and they know that they should, but they might find somebody who isn't equipped to handle their trauma. So, how do they discern whether or not one practitioner or one person, how do they discern what's right for them? Because they don't want to be re-traumatized. It's not like you go into the clothing store and you try on a dress and it doesn't fit. There's significant harm that can be done if it doesn't fit.
Right. So I think that's a really important question, because I have experienced therapists who, I think at worst with me, were just ill-equipped and perhaps dismissive, didn't take things seriously. I think one therapist dismissed when I was sharing about being in an abusive situation, a partnership, and didn't take it seriously. But I haven't actually been re-traumatized, but it is definitely possible. So I think people have to value who they are and know that they're worth being taken seriously. And unfortunately, if you didn't get that as a child, it's kind of hard to realize that. And then people might put up with people who don't hold them and their experiences with the sacredness that they deserve. So I would say, have high standards. This is your healing. It's so important. Try out lots of people and see who you have a rapport with and see who you actually get some good healing done with. I think sometimes also people have this sense of loyalty, or, I don't want to hurt that person's feelings. It's like, if it's not working, find someone else. Or give that person feedback. Ideally, a therapist should really be able to hear even negative feedback and say, I'm going to hear this. I want to have openness in our relationship. I really want to be able to put my own ego aside and hear you and what happened to you, or what I may have caused, So sometimes I say, test your therapist out with a little bit of honesty and see how they respond, So.
And that message is for the people pleaser, because that is the person who I don't want to disrupt. I don't want to, irritate or anything. So the people pleaser, you need to understand that this is for you. This is your own healing. There's one more area I would love to touch upon before we close, and that is the aspect of religion. As a believer, and I actually have to pat myself on the back, because there are things that I used to believe that I shouldn't do because of religion. But now I have come to a place where I understand, oh no, one does not negate the other. But I want to have you comment on it, because very often there are people, and I want to find the right words for this. If they believe in God, and in my particular instance, for example, believe in Jesus, but whatever God they believe in, right? They believe in divinity. They believe in the sanctity and sacredness. There are people in the body of believers that can easily be dismissive, that can easily say, okay, leave that to the Holy Spirit, or leave that to spiritual guidance, and so on and so forth. And it's part of the generational patterns, because there's a tendency to think there's only one way for healing, and that if you're having difficulty, then your faith isn't strong enough. What message do you have for that person who's struggling because they are a believer? You know, that God is God,
Right.
but they've received the messages probably most of their lives that all of these different things are not aligned to where they should be. So what message do you have for a person like that so that they can find healing?
So I would say there's so much research that's been done recently, so many development of different models that can really help us. So I would say give it a try, because we can use so much out there to help us. I would also say that it really depends on a person's spiritual beliefs, but this self that we have, I believe that it's a connection to a divine energy. And I think it's also it's a connection to all of us. It's like a collective union of consciousness or something. And when I am in that self energy, I feel happiest. I feel most connected to people around me, to spirit even. And I think what we can do is, if we can tap into that, then this practice can even be a spiritual practice, because we're accessing something beyond us. So I think it's a combination of, let's use the tools that people are developing, and how can we stay in integrity? And if people do have that belief system, allow spirit to work through them.
Allow spirit to work through them. So that is such, excuse me, a great point to work on. With that said, there's this dichotomy between Eastern and Western. And that goes back to cognitive behavior therapy again, CBT, and the Eastern who believes in the whole parts and the connection between mind, body, and spirit. People tend to know more about CBT, and they know more about that because if they're working and they have health insurance, health insurance is going to cover, okay, let me go see a psychologist. And not to dismiss psychologists, because they have a role to play in our healing, but we want people to know that there are alternative therapies. There are alternatives to what they can do. Yes?
Definitely. Yeah. So there's a lot out there. There really is. And I mean, I'm only specialized in IFS, but sometimes I hear about different types of therapy and I think, oh, I should try those too, and just see how it, how it resonates with the IFS model. So, but IFS has really worked for me. So, in my own journey, and it's really brought together it's brought an integration with so many aspects of my life, from my old meditation practice to just my love of psychology and my understanding of the human condition. So, but yeah, there's so much out there. There really is.
There really is. And how do people get in touch with you?
So my website is multiplemind.com. So you can access my blog. I love writing about applying the IFS model to everyday life. I like teaching about it too. But yeah, they can access me on my website, reach out and email me. I'd love to hear from them.
Okay. You got it. We have to do this again. We started the show this way. We need to end. We need some laughter yoga because we've been talking about some serious things. So take us through those two deep breaths again.
Okay. So let's try a different one. We've been sitting for almost an hour. So let's breathe in.
Okay.
Shake it all out. Take a big deep breath. And then shake it all out.
And shake it all out. Music too, because this is what we do when we do music.
And then just feel how that feels in your body.
It makes your body come alive. And this is the kind of thing that I do that I recommend that people do in terms of anytime you have one of those gloomy days or it's cloudy outside, it's
Right,
cloudy
right.
inside, you just shake it all out.
Yeah, exactly. So
Okay, so Lizbeth De Sa, it was a pleasure. It was a pleasure to have you on About This Life. It was a pleasure to talk about some alternative ways that we can go about the process of healing and source ourselves, ground ourselves back to ourselves, come back home to
that's it
ourselves.
exactly.
So thank you so much. This is Anne Marie, host of About This Life, where we are changing our lives one day at a time.